The heir, with a soul as cold as the rusted metal of the carcass, didn't want to get his hands dirty. To him, his blind mother was merely an encumbrance, a burden that needed to be removed without leaving traces of his own cruelty. With calculating coldness, he tied her firmly to the hood of an abandoned limousine, a decadent monument to lost opulence, and left her there, right in the heart of the panther's hunting ground. Nature will take care of it, he thought, turning his back on what he considered a solved problem. The elderly woman, trapped and disoriented by the perpetual darkness of her blindness, felt only the smell of the wild forest and the deepening cold of the night. Soon, a lean, hungry shadow began to prowl around the tires, its eyes gleaming in the gloom, sniffing out fragility. But then, an even larger presence emerged from the undergrowth. A tiger, majestic and imposing, appeared. With slow and deliberate movements, it climbed onto the roof of the old limousine. From its elevated position, the giant feline used its height and the aura of its primal strength to scare away the smaller beast, which, intimidated, retreated into the shadows. The tiger, the instinctive force of nature, now watched over the blind mother, an unexpected guardian against the darkness that surrounded her. The silence that followed the panther's retreat brought no relief, only a new layer of uncertainty. For the elderly woman tied to the cold hood of the limousine, the perpetual darkness of her blindness was now filled with a cacophony of intensified sensations. The damp smell of earth and decaying leaves mingled with the metallic, rusted odor of the car, and overriding everything, a wild, dense, unmistakable aroma, the smell of the tiger. It was not the fleeting trace of a predator that had passed, but the living, imposing presence of a massive body directly above her. She could feel the animal's weight on the limousine's roof, a subtle vibration that traveled through the car's structure and reached her through the metal beneath her back. Every movement of the feline, no matter how slight, was a tremor that made her hold her breath. The sound of its deep, rhythmic breathing, a muffled growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, was a constant reminder of its proximity. It was the melody of the jungle, now played by an unexpected and terrifying soloist. The panther had retreated, yes, but what was this new guardian? A protector or an executioner in waiting? The elderly woman's mind, accustomed to deciphering the world through sensory fragments, struggled to comprehend. Primal instinct screamed danger, but the absence of an immediate attack, the fact that the tiger had scared away the previous threat, planted a seed of confusion. Could it be that nature, in its indifferent brutality, had sent a guardian angel with claws and teeth? As the night advanced, the cold intensified, penetrating her thin clothes and the icy metal. The ropes tightened around her wrists and ankles, cutting off circulation, and physical pain began to compete with terror. She was exhausted, hungry, and dehydrated, but fear was a motor that prevented rest. Every crack in the undergrowth, every rustle of leaves was a new fright. The tiger up above remained a sphinx of stripes and power, its presence both a shield and a sword, depending on one's perspective. Suddenly, a movement. The tiger stretched, its claws scraping the roof's metal with a sharp, metallic sound that made the elderly woman flinch. She imagined the force behind those scratches, the ability to tear flesh and bone. It readjusted, and the car swayed slightly. A low growl escaped its throat, not of threat, but perhaps of feline contentment. Or perhaps it was just the sound of a predator marking its territory, asserting its supremacy over that metal carcass and the prey tied to it. Far away, the heir, the one who had abandoned her, slept in his soft bed, lulled by the conviction that the problem was solved. His calculating mind had devised a perfect plan, with no loose ends, no blood on his hands. Nature, in his distorted view, would be the executioner, and he, the beneficiary of an inheritance without the burden of a blind mother. He could not imagine the irony unfolding in the forest, where the very nature he expected to devour her now protected her with the ferocity of a tiger. But the tiger's protection was as volatile as the jungle itself. The panther, though scared away, had not vanished. It was a persistent shadow, an opportunistic predator that knew how to wait. And the tiger, majestic as it was a wild animal, guided by instincts the elderly woman could not predict. Its attention could be diverted at any moment, attracted by easier prey, a more interesting scent. That limousine roof was not a sanctuary, but a stage for a survival drama where the rules were written by hunger and brute force. As the night grew denser, the air carried not only the scents of the forest, but also the echo of a distant howl, a call that was neither panther nor tiger, but something more. The elderly woman felt a shiver that did not come solely from the cold. The tiger, on the roof, tensed. Its breathing, once rhythmic, became slower, more attentive. It turned its head, its ears moving like radars, picking up sounds beyond human perception. The forest had not just one predator, but a complex hierarchy, and the howl seemed to challenge the tiger's authority, or perhaps announce a new threat approaching, invisible in the darkness, yet palpable in the cold night air. The tension, which had barely subsided, now rose to a new level, promising that the night was far from over. The distant howl tore through the curtain of silence the forest had woven, a primal sound belonging neither to the lean panther nor the majestic tiger. It was a wild lament, laden with a collective hunger, and it made the cold air vibrate with a promise of even greater danger. On the limousine's roof, the tiger tensed. Every muscle of its massive body became taut, its breathing, once a constant, deep rhythm, was now a subtle, almost imperceptible puff. Its ears, once swiveling radars, fixed in a single direction, picking up frequencies that the elderly woman, even with her senses sharpened by blindness, could barely discern. She felt the change in the car's gravity, a subtle alteration in balance, indicating that the feline had braced itself, perhaps crouching, ready for whatever came. The elderly woman's mind, already a whirlwind of terror and confusion, struggled to interpret this new sign. The panther was a solitary threat, a stealthy predator, but a howl. A howl meant a pack, a collective, a numerical force that could crush even the majesty of a tiger. The fear, which seemed to have reached its peak, found a new depth, an even darker well. The ropes on her wrists and ankles seemed to tighten further, cutting off circulation, and the physical pain was a cruel reminder of her helplessness. The scent changed. The dense aroma of the tiger, which had previously enveloped her like a cloak of power, now mingled with a new odor carried by the wind. It was a sharper, more pungent smell, a mixture of earth, wet fur, and an unmistakable canine ferocity. It was not the scent of a lone wolf, but of many. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves in the undergrowth intensified, no longer an isolated sound, but a symphony of light, rapid footsteps, breaking dry branches and dragging through the low vegetation. The vibration in the ground, transmitted through the tires and the car's structure, grew stronger, more constant, like a distant drum approaching. Then they emerged. Not one, but a dozen lean shadows, with eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. They were wild dogs, or perhaps dholes, with their reddish bodies and pointed muzzles moving with terrifying agility. They were not as large as the tiger, but their strength lay in numbers, in the instinctive coordination of a hungry pack. Their growls were low, guttural, a promise of contained violence. They circled the limousine, their movements fluid and synchronized like a river of predators. The tiger, on the roof, let out a deep growl, a sound that seemed to come from the center of the earth, a warning, an assertion of its sovereignty. It was a sound that would make any solitary creature hesitate. But the pack, driven by hunger and group instinct, did not retreat. On the contrary, the tiger's growl seemed to ignite a spark of defiance in them. One of the dogs, what appeared to be the leader, a larger animal with a scarred muzzle, stopped a few feet from the front tire, its eyes fixed on the tiger above. It let out a sharp bark, a call to action. The elderly woman, trapped between the cold metal and the imminent carnage, felt her heart pound erratically. She could hear the dogs panting, the scratching of their claws on the ground, the snapping of their teeth. The scent of her fear mingled with the wild odor surrounding her. She imagined the scene with terrifying clarity. The tiger, majestic but alone, against the relentless fury of a pack. The limousine, her last precarious refuge, was now the center of a battleground. Suddenly the tiger moved, not an attack, but an agile leap to the rear of the roof, following the movement of the pack attempting to flank the car. The sound of its claws scraping the metal was a war cry. The dogs, in turn, began to jump, trying to reach the hood, their paws scratching the rusted paint. The elderly woman felt the car sway violently with the impacts, and a scream of terror escaped her throat. She was in the middle, a prize, an encumbrance, bait. The tiger, with a powerful roar that echoed through the forest, leaped from the roof to the hood, landing with a thud that made the entire limousine tremble. It positioned itself between the elderly woman and the pack, its striped body a living barrier. Its eyes, which had previously seemed to watch, now gleamed with primal fury. It was a guardian, yes, but a wild guardian, driven by instincts she could not comprehend. It was defending its territory, or perhaps the prey it had claimed. The wild dogs hesitated for a moment. The tiger's proximity, its palpable fury, was a clear warning. But hunger was a powerful driver. They began to growl and bark with more intensity, testing the tiger's limits. One of them, bolder, attempted a charge, leaping towards the tiger's flank. The feline reacted with surprising speed, a blow from its massive paw armed with sharp claws, sending the dog howling backward with a deep wound. The smell of fresh blood, metallic and warm, filled the air, mingling with the other odors. The elderly woman felt the liquid trickle down the hood, hot and sticky, a visceral reminder of the violence unfolding mere inches from her. The tiger, now with bristling fur and bared teeth, was a war machine. It moved with lethal grace, defending the space around the limousine, but the pack was persistent, attacking from all sides, trying to wear down the giant. Far away, the heir, in his peaceful sleep, dreamed of the freedom and fortune that awaited him. He could not hear the growls, the barks, the tiger's roar, nor his mother's muffled scream. He could not smell the blood, nor the biting cold of the night that became the stage for a brutal struggle for survival. His mind, so cold and calculating, had underestimated the complexity of nature, the unpredictability of its actors, and the irony of a destiny unfolding in ways he could never conceive. The night was far from over, and the elderly woman, tied to the hood, was the blind witness to a spectacle of life and death, where her fate hung in the balance of claws and teeth. But the pack was persistent. Hunger was a powerful driver, and the smell of blood, instead of frightening them, seemed only to fuel their frenzy. They were not solitary predators, but a collective force, and the pain of one was an acceptable sacrifice for the group's success. The wild dogs began to growl and bark with more intensity, testing the tiger's limits, attacking from all sides, trying to wear down the giant. They ran in circles, their shadows dancing in the darkness, seeking an opening. A flaw in the feline's defense. The elderly woman, tied to the hood, felt every impact, every scratch on the metal, every vibration of the struggle. The car swayed violently, and she feared the ropes would break, or that the tiger, in its fury, would accidentally strike her. She could hear the dog's teeth snapping, the sound of their claws scraping the hood, trying to climb, trying to reach the vulnerable flesh. One of them, bolder, leapt again, not towards the tiger, but towards the front tire, sinking its teeth into the rubber, trying to deflate what remained of her protection. The sound of tearing rubber, a sharp, prolonged hiss, made the elderly woman's heart race. The tiger reacted with a roar that made the trees tremble, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It delivered a devastating blow with its paw, striking the dog, attacking the tire. The animal was thrown far away, howling, but the damage was done. The tire began to deflate slowly, the car tilting slightly to one side, a reminder of its fragility. The limousine, once a symbol of luxury and safety, was now a rusted carcass, vulnerable to nature's attacks. The pack, sensing the vulnerability, intensified the attack. They were not stupid. They knew that an immobilized car was easier prey. While some distracted the tiger, others tried to attack the remaining tires or the doors, seeking any weak point. The tiger, majestic and powerful, was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Its movements, though still lethal, were slightly less swift, its breathing more labored. It was a formidable warrior, but it was alone against a dozen relentless predators. The elderly woman, with her senses sharpened by blindness, could feel the tiger's sweat, the scent of its exertion mingled with blood and earth. She imagined the scene with terrifying clarity, the massive body of the feline, its stripes vibrating in the darkness, muscles taut, teeth bared, a deadly ballet of survival. She was a forced spectator, a silent prize in the life-or-death struggle unfolding above and around her. The irony was cruel. The very animal her son expected to devour her now fought to protect her, perhaps out of territorial instinct, perhaps for a reason the human mind could not comprehend. Suddenly, a new sound. It was not the howl of the dogs, nor the roar of the tiger. It was a dry snap, followed by a metallic screech. One of the rear tires, already weakened by the attacks, finally gave way, and the car sank further to the side. The impact made the elderly woman let out a groan of pain, the ropes tightening further around her wrists and ankles. The limousine, now with two flat tires, was completely immobilized, its structure twisted and vulnerable. The pack noticed the change. Their growls became sharper, more triumphant. They approached, their eyes gleaming in the darkness, as if victory was within reach. The tiger, exhausted but still defiant, let out a final roar, a last warning. But the night was far from over, and the elderly woman, tied to the hood, was the blind witness to a spectacle of life and death, where her fate hung in the balance of claws and teeth, and with each passing second, the scales seemed to tip further towards darkness. The tiger now seemed more like a last bastion than an invincible protector. The metallic screech of the tire giving way was a grim premonition. The limousine, already swaying, sank further to the side, like a ship slowly foundering. The elderly woman felt her body being pulled, the ropes tightening with renewed force, cutting into the already sensitive skin of her wrists and ankles. A moan escaped her lips, muffled by the terror that enveloped her. The smell of burning rubber mingled with blood and earth, an olfactory cocktail of misfortune. The pack, sensing the vulnerability, did not hesitate. Their growls became sharper, more triumphant, as if victory was within reach of their claws. They approached, their shadows dancing in the darkness, eyes gleaming with insatiable hunger. The tiger, exhausted but still defiant, let out a final roar, a last warning that sounded more like a lament than a threat. Its muscles, once tense and vibrant, now trembled with exertion, and its panting breath was a constant rhythm of its internal battle. The pack leader, the dog with the scarred muzzle, took advantage of the car's tilt. With an agile leap, it managed to reach the hood, its claws scratching the rusted metal mere inches from the elderly woman. She felt the animal's hot, fetid breath, the smell of its dirty, wild fur. A scream caught in her throat as the dog, with bared teeth, tried to bite the ropes that bound her, or perhaps her exposed flesh. The tiger reacted with renewed fury, a surge of adrenaline that seemed to come from the depths of its wild soul. With a swift movement, it lunged at the dog, its claws tearing through the air before striking the intruder's flank. The dog howled in pain, falling from the hood with a dull thud, but not before managing to tear a piece of the rope, binding the elderly woman's left wrist. She felt a momentary relief from the pressure, followed by an even greater dread. The rope was looser but also more fragile. The struggle intensified. The pack, like a school of piranhas, attacked from all sides. While the tiger dealt with one, 2 or 3 others tried to climb onto the car, or gnaw at the remaining tires, or even the doors, seeking any weak point. The sound of metal being torn, of rubber being chewed, of claws scraping paint, created an infernal symphony of destruction. The limousine, once a symbol of luxury, was now a metallic skeleton, being dismantled piece by piece. The elderly woman, trapped in the center of this carnage, felt the car sway violently with each impact. She could hear the dog's teeth snapping, the sound of their claws scraping the hood, trying to climb, trying to reach the vulnerable flesh. The smell of fresh blood, metallic and warm, filled the air, mingling with the other wild odors. She felt the liquid trickle down the hood, hot and sticky, a visceral reminder of the violence unfolding mere inches from her. The tiger, majestic and powerful, was beginning to show signs of extreme fatigue. Its movements, though still lethal, were slightly less swift, its breathing more labored, its growls hoarser. It was a formidable warrior, but it was alone against a dozen relentless predators. With each blow, each leap, it seemed to lose a little more of its vital strength. Suddenly, a new danger. While the tiger was busy defending the opposite side of the car, 2 more cunning dogs managed to climb onto the hood, crawling beneath the elderly woman's body. She felt their weight and movement, the shiver of their rough fur against her back. One of them began to bite the ropes binding her ankles, the other, and those holding her right wrist. The sound of fibers snapping was clear, unmistakable. The tiger, sensing the movement, let out a roar of fury, turning with surprising agility. It delivered a devastating blow, but one of the dogs managed to dodge, leaping off the hood with a piece of rope in its mouth. The other was hit, but the damage was already done. The elderly woman's ankles were now almost free, and her right wrist dangled, held by only a few threads. The limousine, with its right side now lower due to the flat tires and the weight of the tiger and dogs, began to tilt even further. The elderly woman felt her body slide, gravity pulling her sideways off the hood. The remaining ropes stretched painfully, threatening to give way at any moment. She was on the brink of an abyss, one step away from falling into the midst of the hungry pack. The elderly woman's world turned upside down. It was not a metaphor, but the purest and most terrifying reality. The limousine, already a twisted metallic skeleton, finally gave way under the weight of the attacks and the tilt. The right side sank with a groan of metal and torn rubber, and her body slid, the remaining ropes stretching with a searing pain that seemed to tear her very flesh. A cry, more a hoarse lament, escaped her throat as she felt the final pull. The threads binding her right wrist snapped one by one, like dry branches breaking under pressure. Her ankles, already almost free, came loose completely with a painful tug, but one that freed her from the final binding. For an instant, a fraction of a second, she felt the vertigo of emptiness, the cold night air against her exposed skin, the fetid smell of hungry dogs waiting below. She was falling. But the fall was not what she expected. It was not the violent impact against the ground, nor the direct plunge into the pack's jaws. Instead, her body slid sideways into the limousine through the shattered rear passenger window. The tiger, in a desperate and instinctive movement, had launched itself against the car at the exact moment she plummeted, its weight and the impact of its claws against the bodywork creating a swing that, by sheer luck or divine intervention, propelled her inside the vehicle. She landed in a tangle of torn upholstery, shards of glass, and the smell of mold and dried blood. The impact was strong, knocking the breath from her, but she was inside, not on the ground, not in the dog's jaws. The darkness there was even denser, a velvet shroud that muffled the outside world, but sharpened her other senses even further. She could feel the cold, sharp metal of the car. The remnants of luxury turned into traps, the smell of her own blood mingled with that of the animals. Outside, the battle did not cease. The pack, frustrated by the prey that had escaped their grasp at the last instant, redoubled their attacks. Furious growls and sharp barks echoed, and she could feel the car sway violently as the dogs tried to climb, scratching the bodywork, biting the edges of the broken windows. She heard the snapping of teeth against metal, the sound of claws scraping paint, an infernal symphony of fury and hunger. The tiger, in turn, seemed to have understood the change of scenery. With the elderly woman now relatively safe inside the metallic cocoon, it no longer needed to defend the hood directly. Instead of fighting at ground level, where the numerical disadvantage was overwhelming, it did what nature dictated. It sought a position of dominance. With a roar that made the car vibrate, it leapt, not to the ground but upwards. She heard the sound of massive claws scraping the bodywork, the feline's concentrated effort. The car swayed with the colossal weight of the climbing tiger. First onto the trunk lid, then, with a powerful leap, it reached the main roof of the limousine. The impact was deafening, a dull thud that made the elderly woman shrink further into the vehicle's interior. The roof, already dented and rusted, groaned under the new load, but held. From its new elevated position, the tiger let out a roar that was not of exhaustion, but of pure, untamed fury. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the darkness, a primal warning that reverberated through the hunting ground. The elderly woman, even blind, could imagine the scene. The massive body of the feline, its stripes vibrating in the darkness, now imposing against the night sky, its majestic silhouette dominating the landscape. It was on top, the king of its improvised domain. The pack, for a brief moment, hesitated. The growls diminished, replaced by more cautious howls. The tiger's height, its dominant presence, was a psychological barrier. They were accustomed to hunting in packs, to overpowering their prey by number and cunning. But a tiger on the roof of a car, looking down with eyes that gleamed in the darkness, was a sight that inspired primal respect, an ancestral fear. The beast that prowled the tires was now confronted by a threat, watching it from above. But hunger was a powerful driver. The pack leader, the scarred dog, growled, inciting its companions. They could not reach the tiger on the roof, but the limousine was still vulnerable. They began to circle the car again, their barks now a mixture of frustration and determination. They tried to find a new opening, a door that could be torn off, a gap in the metal, anything that would lead them to the prey they knew was inside. The elderly woman, in the dark, claustrophobic interior, felt every movement, every scratch, every bite against the bodywork. The smell of the tiger's blood and sweat, now more distant, mingled with the metallic scent of rust and the pungent odor of the dogs. She was trapped in a metal box, with a predator on the roof and others all around, all fighting for her life or for her death. The irony of the situation was a slow poison. Her son wanted her dead, and now a tiger fought to keep her alive, while wild dogs tried to finish the job. The tiger on the roof was not still. She could feel the car tremble as it moved, patrolling its new fortress. Every now and then, a deep roar echoed, followed by a yelp of pain from one of the dogs that dared to approach too closely. It used its height, its mass, its voice to intimidate, to keep the pack at bay, but with each passing minute, the tiger's energy waned. It was a formidable guardian, but not invincible, and the night, relentless, was far from over. The elderly woman in her dark prison knew that with each passing second, the scales of life and death continued to tip, and destiny, with its peculiar cruelty, still held many surprises in store. The limousine's interior was a tomb of metal and darkness, a claustrophobic cocoon where the air seemed thin and heavy. Every scratch on the bodywork, every muffled growl, every thud against the roof reverberated through the elderly woman's body, amplified by the oppressive silence that surrounded her. She smelled the metallic scent of dried blood, mingled with the mold of torn upholstery and the pungent odor of her own urine and fear. Her fingers, still trembling from the impact, fumbled across the uneven floor, finding shards of glass, broken plastic pieces, and what felt like a loose wire, sharp and cold. Outside, the pack did not give up. The barks and growls had become more coordinated, more insistent. She could feel the car sway violently, not just with the tiger's weight on the roof, but with the concentrated fury of the dogs. They were not merely scratching, they were attacking with brutal intelligence, testing every weak point, every crevice, every metal seam. One group seemed to focus on the rear left door, biting the rusted handle, while others tried to widen the broken windows, their heads and muzzles squeezing through the openings. The tiger, on the roof, was a weary guardian. Its roars, once powerful and full of fury, now came in shorter bursts, punctuated by heavy gasps. She could feel the car tremble as it moved, a slower, more deliberate movement, as if each step required monumental effort. Every now and then, a dull thud and a yelp of pain indicated that it could still fend off one or another bolder dog, but the frequency of these attacks diminished. The feline's energy was waning, and the elderly woman, with her sharpened senses, perceived this with terrifying clarity. The protector was becoming vulnerable. The dog's hunger, on the other hand, only grew. They were an orchestra of teeth and claws, a symphony of destruction. The pack leader, the scarred dog, seemed to be everywhere at once, its deep growl inciting the others. Its presence felt in every stronger attack. It wasn't just looking for an opening, it was creating one. Suddenly, a different sound. It was not the snapping of metal or the scraping of claws, but a prolonged screech, a groan of old rubber and twisted metal, coming from beneath the car. The elderly woman felt the vehicle tilt even further to the left side, the opposite side to the one already sunken. One of the tires, perhaps the last one still holding some pressure, finally gave way, bursting with a muffled but audible sound that made the car sink deeper into the soft earth. With the new imbalance, the limousine became an even more precarious trap. The elderly woman slid sideways, hitting her shoulder against what felt like the backrest of a front seat, now toppled. The pain was sharp, but the urgency of her situation was greater. The dog's scent grew stronger, closer. They were approaching the new point of vulnerability. The tiger, as if sensing the new threat, let out a desperate roar, a sound that seemed to tear its own throat. It moved quickly on the roof, its colossal weight making the car sway dangerously. One of the dogs, more cunning, had crept beneath the car, taking advantage of the tilt and the newly created space from the flat tire. The elderly woman heard the sound of scratches coming from below, directly beneath where she lay. It was trying to enter through the floor, the metal, already corroded by rust and weakened by years of abandonment, began to give way. Small snaps like breaking bones echoed inside the car. She could feel the floor vibrate under the attack. It wouldn't be long. The tiger, unable to reach the dog from below, delivered a furious blow against the roof, a thunderous sound that made the entire car tremble. It was an act of frustration, of desperation. It was losing the battle. Panic began to set in. The elderly woman tried to shrink further, but there was nowhere to go. She was cornered, trapped inside a sardine can about to be opened. The tiger's sweat and blood, now fainter, mingled with the fetid smell of the approaching dogs, and her own fear, a pungent and unmistakable odor. Then the floor gave way. Not all at once, but with a slow, agonizing tear. An irregular hole with jagged edges opened directly beneath her feet. The cold night air, mingled with the scent of dogs and earth, invaded the interior. And then a paw. A dirty paw with sharp claws emerged from the darkness, groping the car's interior. A low, guttural growl accompanied the apparition, and the elderly woman felt the heat of the animal's breath. The tiger on the roof roared again, a sound of pure fury and desperation, and lunged towards the edge of the roof, attempting perhaps to jump to the ground and confront the threat directly. But the movement was clumsy, and the car, already unstable, swayed violently. The elderly woman felt her body being thrown sideways, hitting her head against what felt like the door. A throbbing pain spread, and for an instant, the dark world spun. When the dizziness passed, she realized the hole in the floor had widened. More paws, more muzzles, more growls. The pack was invading. The tiger, in its attempt to maneuver, had created a new vulnerability, a gap in the defense. The irony was cruel. With each effort to protect her, the tiger seemed, unintentionally, to open new doors to death. The night was far from over, and destiny, with its peculiar cruelty, was about to reveal its next surprise. The scales of life and death now tipped dangerously towards darkness, and the elderly woman's time seemed to be running out. The cold night air, once a distant promise of relief, now invaded the limousine's interior like a fetid breath, laden with the smell of damp earth, wet fur, and the pungent odor of a predator. A paw, dirty and with sharp claws, groped the dark space, its movements hesitant yet full of hungry curiosity. The elderly woman felt the heat of the animal's breath, a warm, moist gust that brushed her face, followed by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It was no longer an external threat. It was an invasion, a violation of her last refuge. The sound of metal being torn, not by claws but by teeth, echoed. The dogs, now more confident, were widening the opening, their heads squeezing through the irregular hole. She heard the snapping of bones, perhaps her own, perhaps the car's, and felt the rough touch of fur against her leg. A damp, cold muzzle brushed her thigh, and a sharp tooth lightly scratched her skin, a warning, a promise of pain. Panic, once a distant wave, was now a tsunami engulfing her, suffocating her. On the roof, the tiger was in a terrible dilemma. Its height, once an advantage, was now a barrier. It could see the invasion below, feel the car's tremor, hear the ravenous growls coming from within. Its energy was waning, but the sight of its prey being attacked by other predators rekindled a primal fury. It could not leap inside without becoming easy prey in a confined space, and it could not descend to the ground without abandoning its dominant position and risking being overwhelmed by the pack. But the tiger was not just brute force, it was also cunning. It could not reach the dogs through the floor, but it could reach them another way. With a roar that seemed to tear its own throat, the tiger positioned itself directly over the area where the invasion was occurring, right above the hole in the floor. Then, with renewed and desperate strength, it began to attack the car's roof, not with the intention of entering, but of destroying it. Its claws, once used for climbing, now became demolition tools. The rusted metal groaned, creaked, and snapped under the impact of its paws. It wasn't just scratching, it was tearing, hammering, using its colossal weight and the car's inertia to create a new point of attack. The roof, already fragile, began to give way under the feline's fury. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of twisted metal, furious growls. and the elderly woman's cries of pain as she cowered, protecting her head with her arms, while small pieces of rust and upholstery fell upon her. The car swayed violently, like a boat in a storm. With each blow from the tiger, the limousine structure groaned, threatening to collapse completely. Suddenly, with an agonizing tear and a final snap, a piece of the roof gave way. Not a clean hole, but an irregular fissure with jagged edges that opened directly above the hole in the floor. The night air now could be felt coming from above and below. The tiger, without hesitation, thrust a massive paw through the new opening. It was not a precise attack, but a wild, blind strike driven by fury. The paw, with its sharp claws, descended like lightning, hitting the dark interior. A sharp yelp of pain echoed, not from the elderly woman, but from one of the dogs that was squeezing through the hole in the floor. The smell of fresh blood, warm and metallic, filled the air, mingling with the scent of fear and rust. The pack, caught by surprise by the attack coming from an unexpected direction, hesitated. The pack leader, the scarred dog, growled furiously, but its companions retreated for an instant, confused and injured. The tiger, seizing the paws, delivered another blow and then another, turning the car's interior into a chaotic battlefield. It could not see, but it could feel. Its blows were like hammers, crushing the metal and occasionally hitting one of the invaders. The elderly woman, trapped in the midst of the pandemonium, felt the car tremble, the smell of blood intensify, the growls and yelps mingle. She was in a hell of metal and fury, with a predator on the roof fighting other predators on the floor, and she, the prey, at the center of it all. The irony was brutal. The tiger, her unlikely guardian, was now destroying the very car to protect her, transforming her prison into an even more dangerous battlefield. The scales of life and death, once tipping, now spun wildly, and destiny, with its peculiar cruelty, still held many surprises in store. The sound of tearing metal and snapping claws was the only song of that infernal night, and the elderly woman knew that the end, in one way or another, was near. The hell of metal and fury was not a metaphor. It was the palpable reality engulfing the elderly woman. Each blow from the tiger on the roof was a thunderclap that reverberated in her bones, making the car tremble like a dying animal. The twisted metal groaned, shrieked, and tore under the colossal force of the feline, which did not attack to enter, but to destroy, to reach the enemies squeezing in from below. Small fragments of rust, upholstery, and even pieces of rubber fell upon her, mingling with the pungent smell of sweat, blood, and fear. The tiger's massive paw, a blind and powerful weapon, descended repeatedly through the irregular fissure in the roof. There was no precision, only the brute force of a predator defending its territory, its prey. A sharp yelp of pain and surprise echoed again from the hole in the floor, followed by a furious growl from the pack leader. The dogs, once so confident in their invasion, were now confused, attacked from a direction they did not expect. The smell of fresh blood, warm and metallic, became more intense, saturating the already heavy air. The elderly woman, cowering, desperately tried to protect her head with her arms, but there was no escape. She was at the epicenter of a savage battle, a puppet of flesh and bone between two armies of teeth and claws. The car swayed from side to side, throwing her against the corroded sides, each impact a new pain added to the old ones. She could feel the floor vibrate under the attack of the dogs, who, despite the confusion, did not give up. They gnawed at the edges of the hole, widening it further. With each metallic snap, another piece of her fragile fortress crumbled. The tiger's paw, in one of its wild blows, descended with such force that the roof gave way even further, opening a new fissure, wider, more menacing. This time the paw not only struck the interior, but extended, groping the space. The claws, sharp as razors, brushed dangerously close to her leg, a chilling shiver running down her spine. She could feel the displacement of air, the proximity of death coming from above and below. The pack leader, the scarred dog, growled with renewed fury. It was not one to retreat. Its companions, though wounded and hesitant, were still hungry. It tried to coordinate a new attack, a flanking maneuver against the tiger's paw that now partially blocked the roof entrance. But the space was tight and the chaos total. One of the dogs, bolder or perhaps more desperate, tried to squeeze through a side crevice of the hole in the floor, managing to get its head and part of its shoulder through. Its red eyes, visible in the darkness, gleamed with insatiable hunger. The elderly woman felt the dog's hot, fetid breath on her face, the smell of rotten meat and saliva. A low growl, almost a hiss, escaped the animal's throat, and she felt the rough touch of its tongue on her cheek. It was not an attack, not yet, but an exploration, a measurement of the prey. Its teeth, sharp and dirty, were inches from her skin. Panic, once a tsunami, was now an ocean drowning her, stealing her air, her voice. On the roof, the tiger, sensing the new threat, let out a roar that seemed to tear the very air. It could not see the dog, but it felt the movement, the proximity of the prey. With surprising speed for its size, it withdrew its paw from the central fissure and with a clumsy but powerful movement delivered a lateral blow to the roof. Directly above where the dog was trying to squeeze through, the metal groaned and bent, and the dog howled in pain, recoiling sharply, its head hitting the floor. A wet sound of something breaking echoed, but the tiger's blow came at a cost. The limousine's already compromised structure could not withstand the new impact. With a final, agonizing snap, the side of the roof, where the tiger had struck, completely gave way, tearing like wet paper. A large piece of metal, twisted and jagged, fell into the car's interior, hitting the backrest of the rear seat and ricocheting dangerously close to the elderly woman. The entire car tilted even further to the side, the flat tire sinking completely into the soft earth. The tiger, now with an even larger opening in the roof, could better see the interior, the darkness dotted by the hungry eyes of the dogs. It roared again, a sound of triumph and fury, and thrust both front paws through the new opening, its claws searching for the invaders. It could not enter, but it could extend its dominion, transforming the car's interior into its own hunting ground. The dogs, in turn, were at a disadvantage. Attacked from above and with limited maneuvering space, they thrashed, growling and howling, but unable to coordinate an effective attack. The smell of blood intensified, and the elderly woman could hear the sound of flesh being torn, not just from the car, but from something alive. One of the dogs let out a prolonged yelp of pain, and the sound of a body quickly dragging itself out of the hole in the floor indicated that one of them had been hit and was fleeing. The scales of life and death, which had previously spun wildly, now seemed to tip, albeit by a thread, towards the tiger. It was destroying the car, yes, but it was, in fact, protecting her. The irony was cruel, but the effectiveness undeniable. The limousine, now more a ruin than a refuge, was a battlefield where life and death confronted each other in a spectacle of fury and despair. The night was far from over, and destiny, with its peculiar cruelty, still held many surprises in store. The sound of tearing metal and snapping claws was the only song of that infernal night, and the elderly woman knew that the end, in one way or another, was near. But, for a brief instant, the dog's attack subsided, and a tense silence, laden with expectation, fell upon the shattered limousine. It was the pause before the next wave, the brief respite before hell rekindled. The silence that followed the wounded dog's yelp of pain was not peace, but the tense pause of a lurking predator. The elderly woman, bound and blind, felt the sudden absence of frantic fury as a physical blow. Her ears, now acutely tuned, strained against the ringing in her head. The metallic taste of blood, the pungent smell of fear, still hung heavy in the air, but the frantic scratching, the growls, and the desperate yelps had momentarily ceased. She could hear the tiger's heavy, rhythmic breathing above her, a deep rumble that vibrated through the car's remaining structure. It was the sound of immense power, of a predator asserting its dominance, even in the midst of chaos. Below, the silence was even more unsettling. Had they fled? All of them? Or were they merely regrouping, their cunning minds devising a new and more insidious attack? The car, a twisted skeleton, groaned softly under the tiger's weight, its metal protesting with every movement. Her question was soon answered. A low growl, almost imperceptible, emanated from beneath the car, not from the main opening, but from a point further back, near the rear wheel. It was the leader, the scarred dog. It was communicating, not with aggressive snarls, but with a guttural language of strategy. She imagined them, a dark cluster in the shadows, their eyes gleaming, their hunger unwavering, perhaps even intensified by the taste of blood and the humiliation of retreat. The tiger, too, seemed to sense this. Its breathing deepened, a warning growl rumbling in its chest, a sound that promised swift and brutal retaliation. It shifted its weight, its massive paws, now visible through the widened fissures in the roof, tensing. Then a new sound, not from the main hole in the floor, but from the opposite side of the car, near the other rear wheel. A faint scratch, hesitant at first, then growing in audacity. They were trying to flank the tiger, to split its attention. The elderly woman felt an icy dread spread through her. If they attacked from two sides, the tiger, massive as it was, could not defend both simultaneously. Its focus was on the main opening, where it had inflicted damage. Now the dogs were exploiting its blind spots, using the limousine's own structure, its dilapidated state, against her. The scratching intensified, accompanied by soft, insidious gnawing sounds. They weren't just trying to get in. They were trying to create new entry points. The tiger, with an almost human intelligence, seemed to understand the maneuver. It let out a frustrated roar, a sound that shook the entire car. It could not be everywhere at once. Its massive head, framed by the torn metal of the roof, turned, its eyes sweeping the periphery, though it still could not see the dogs directly beneath the car's chassis. It had to choose. The main opening, where the leader still lurked, or the new threats emerging from the sides. With a decisive and powerful movement, it withdrew its front paws from the central opening, its claws scraping against the metal, and then, with a thunderous impact, slammed one of its paws against the side of the roof, directly above where the new scratching had begun. The car shrieked in protest, the metal twisting and tearing. A yelp of pain, short and sharp, confirmed a hit, but the other side, the other new threat, remained. The impact of the tiger's paw was so violent that the entire limousine lurched, throwing the elderly woman against the steering wheel, the rusted metal biting into her shoulder. A sharp, burning pain shot through her arm. She gasped, but the sound was lost in the cacophony. From the side where the tiger had just struck, a new and larger piece of metal broke loose, falling inside the car, narrowly missing her head. It clattered against the dashboard, sending a shower of rust and debris over her. She could feel the cold, jagged edge of the torn metal mere inches from her face. Her heart pounded uncontrollably against her ribs, a frantic beat against the symphony of destruction. She was no longer just an observer. She was part of the battlefield, every blow, every tear, every tremor, a direct threat to her fragile existence. The dogs, despite their injuries, were relentless. The one that had yelped retreated, but another, emboldened by the tiger's divided attention, renewed its attack on the other side. This time, it wasn't just a scratch. It was a tearing, pulling at the already weakened chassis, trying to open a gap large enough to squeeze through. The sounds were closer now, disturbingly intimate. She could hear the tearing of fabric, the splintering of old wood from the car's interior, the metallic friction of claws against metal. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, dog fur, and the ever-present scent of blood. The tiger, sensing the renewed attack, roared again, a frustrated guttural sound. It was being overwhelmed. In a desperate attempt to counter the flanking maneuver, the tiger did something unexpected. Instead of striking the roof, it began to tear at the car's remaining structure, specifically the rear window and the frame around it. Its objective was not to enter, but to create a wider field of vision, to expose the attackers. With immense force, it ripped out the entire rear window frame, sending shards of glass clattering to the ground outside. The metal shrieked, protesting its ultimate ruin. Now, a gaping maw opened at the back of the limousine, revealing the dark jungle beyond. The tiger, with its powerful neck, peered through this new opening, its eyes now visible to the elderly woman as faint gleams in the darkness, searching for the elusive attackers. This new opening, however, also further exposed the car's interior. The dogs, seeing their chance, converged on the rear. The leader, with a triumphant growl, surged forward, trying to leap through the newly created gap. But the tiger was ready. With a swift, powerful blow, it met the dog in midair, a sickening thud, a yelp of agony, and the sound of a body hitting the ground. One less. But the victory was short-lived. While the tiger focused on the rear, the main hole in the floor, previously guarded, was now vulnerable. The elderly woman felt a sudden sharp pressure on her leg. A dog, silent and swift, had finally gotten through. Its teeth, warm and sharp, brushed her skin, not biting but testing, claiming. The smell of its breath, putrid and warm, filled her nostrils. She screamed a raw, primal sound, but no one was there to hear it. The tiger, momentarily distracted by its prey, was too late. The battle had shifted, and the enemy was now inside her prison, inches away. Hell had found a new and terrifying dimension. The end was no longer a distant threat. It was a warm breath on her skin, a sharp tooth in her flesh. Her scream, a raw, primal sound, tore through the night, but there was no one to hear it, save the predators and the darkness itself. The dog's putrid breath, hot and moist, enveloped her leg, a promise of pain, a caress of death. The sharp teeth did not bite, not yet. Instead, the dog's mouth opened, and a rough, warm tongue licked her skin. A grotesque exploration, a macabre prelude that made the elderly woman tremble uncontrollably. Every muscle in her body contracted in silent agony as the smell of wet fur and earth mingled with the metallic odor of her own fear. The tiger on the roof sensed the change. The elderly woman's scream, the intensified scent of dread, and the unmistakable presence of an intruder within its improvised territory. A roar of fury and frustration erupted from its chest, shaking the shattered car to its foundations. The vibration traveled through the metal, the steering wheel, the ropes that bound her, to the elderly woman's very bones. It was a sound of power and rage, a warning that the line had been crossed. The dog inside, a spectre of hunger and malice, did not rush. It knew it had the advantage, or so it thought. Its eyes, even in the darkness, gleamed with cruel intelligence as it moved, dragging itself closer to the elderly woman's leg, as if savoring the terror of its prey. It growled low, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate directly in the woman's bones. With a sudden movement, the tiger shifted its weight, not to attack the dog directly, but to tear the roof above the area where the intruder was. Its claws, like giant knives, ripped through the corroded metal, not to enter, but to create a hole from which it could launch an attack, or perhaps just to terrorize the invader. The metal shrieked in agony, and a shower of rust and shards of old upholstery fell upon the elderly woman. She coughed, choked, but could not move, bound to her own metal cross. The dog inside, caught by surprise by the new attack from above, recoiled with a warning growl. It had not expected the tiger to be able to create a new opening so quickly and so close. It slinked, its movements swift and furtive, towards the hole in the floor through which it had entered, seeking the relative safety of the exit. But the tiger was faster, more cunning. It had anticipated the maneuver. With a roar that made the car vibrate, it moved its massive front paws to the main opening in the floor, blocking the dog's escape route. Outside, the other dogs, witnesses to the drama, howled and snarled, their frustration palpable. They could not help their companion, and the tiger, from its elevated position, seemed invincible, a mountain of muscle and fury. The cornered dog, with no escape, turned to the elderly woman. Its eyes gleamed with a brutal decision. If it couldn't flee, it would take something with it. With a sudden leap, it attacked, not her leg, but the arm that was tied to the steering wheel. Its teeth sank into her flesh, a shock of excruciating pain that made the elderly woman scream again, a sound that mingled with the dog's victorious snarl and the tiger's furious roar. The tiger, sensing the bite, the smell of fresh blood, exploded in fury. It could not reach the dog directly, but it could use its strength in other ways. With a swift and precise movement, one of its front paws descended through the new opening in the roof, not to strike but to grab. Its claws extended, seeking the dog's body. The dog, still with its teeth embedded in the elderly woman's arm, was caught by surprise. It let out a yelp of pain and surprise when the tiger's claws struck it, not enough to kill it, but to make it release its prey. The elderly woman felt the pressure of the teeth disappear, replaced by a throbbing pain and the moist warmth of blood trickling down her arm. She was wounded, but alive. The dog, injured, staggered backward, its eyes fixed on the tiger. It had underestimated its adversary's intelligence and persistence. The escape route was still blocked. With a powerful tug, the tiger tried to drag the dog out of the car, through the opening in the roof. The dog resisted, its claws scratching the upholstery, trying to cling to anything. The entire limousine swayed violently with the struggle, the metal groaning under the tension. The elderly woman was shaken from side to side, each movement a torture for her already exhausted body. The dog, in a last act of desperation, managed to break free from the tiger's claws. It fell to the car's floor with a dull thud, panting but still alive. Outside, the howls of the other dogs intensified, a chorus of encouragement and despair. They were on the verge of a frenzy, the sight of their wounded and cornered companion fueling their fury. The tiger, with a cold, brutal intelligence, seemed to change its tactics. Instead of trying to grab the dog again, it began to dismantle the car. Its massive paws, with inhuman strength, tore through the roof, the dashboard, what remained of the windshield, opening the car's interior like a sardine can. Shards of glass, twisted metal pieces, and scraps of fabric rained down on the elderly woman. She closed her eyes, or what remained of her sight, and prayed. She prayed that death would be swift, or that the tiger would be precise in its fury. The dog, now completely exposed, with nowhere to hide, snarled in terror. The refuge it had gained with so much effort was being destroyed around it. The tiger did not stop. It continued to tear and break, transforming what remained of the limousine into a deadly trap for the dog and a hell for the elderly woman. The sound of tearing and shattering metal was deafening, a hymn to destruction. Finally, with one last violent rip, the tiger opened a hole so large in the side of the car that the dog, with nothing to cling to, slipped and fell out directly into the arms of the other dogs. The battle had moved again, but the elderly woman, more exposed than ever, felt that the end was only just beginning. The thud of the dog falling out of the car was followed by a chorus of howls and growls that erupted in the darkness. The elderly woman, with her arm throbbing and body trembling, felt the cold night air on her skin, now exposed by holes and tears in the carcass of what had once been a limousine. The smell of blood, hers and the wounded dog's, mingled with the metallic odor of rust and the damp scent of the jungle. she was more vulnerable than ever. Prey, tied to an altar of twisted metal. The tiger, on the roof, wasted no time. With the intruder expelled, its attention turned to the hungry pack outside. A deep, authoritative roar erupted from its chest, not a roar of blind fury, but a calculated warning, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very trees around them. It was the voice of authority, of brute and unquestionable force. The dog's howls, for a brief moment, subsided, replaced by more cautious growls, an acknowledgement of the imposing threat looming over them. The elderly woman could feel the vibration of the roof under the tiger's weight, the slow and deliberate movement of its paws. It was no longer tearing the car, it was positioning itself, a vigilant sentinel. She could hear the dragging of its claws on the metal, a harsh scraping sound that announced its presence to any creature daring to approach. The air was heavy with tension. Every breath the elderly woman took was an effort, every beat of her heart a drum of dread. The dogs, however, were persistent, driven by hunger and the sight of their wounded companion. The pack leader, the same one who had tried to jump through the rear window, let out a sharp growl, a call to action. The pack, as one body, began to circle the car again, their footsteps light and furtive in the damp foliage. She could hear them, now not just growling, but scratching the metal at the car's base, testing the defenses, looking for a new opening. The car, already a skeleton, seemed to groan under the harassment. The tiger, sensing the renewed threat, moved, not a sudden movement but a calculated slide. It positioned itself on the edge of the roof, directly above where the dogs were most active. Its eyes, though invisible to the elderly woman, she knew were fixed on the predators below. And then it did something unexpected. Instead of attacking, it used its own height and weight. With a roar that made the air tremble, it lunged downwards, not to the ground, but to the side of the car, using its front paws to slam into the remaining metal, creating a deafening crash that echoed through the jungle. The impact was brutal. The limousine, already precarious, swayed violently. The elderly woman was thrown against the steering wheel, the pain in her bitten arm intensifying with each jolt. She could feel the ropes binding her stretch, threatening to tear her skin. The sound of metal crumpling and groaning was like a death cry for the vehicle. But the effect on the dogs was immediate. The crash, the vibration, and the tiger's sudden close appearance, even if only its paws, made them recoil in panic, their howls now mingled with yelps of fear. The tiger did not stop. It repeated the movement, slamming into the opposite side of the car, then the rear, transforming what remained of the limousine into a war drum, an instrument of terror. Each blow was a warning, each crash a reminder of its overwhelming strength. The dogs, disoriented and terrified, began to disperse, their growls growing more distant, their footsteps more hurried. The pack, which had once seemed invincible, was being dismantled by the sheer power and presence of the tiger. The elderly woman, gasping, felt a brief relief. The silence that followed the tiger's last blows was almost as terrifying as the noise, but it was a silence of absence, not of imminent threat. She could hear only the sound of her own labored breathing and the frantic pounding of her heart. The dog's scent was fading, replaced by the cleaner aroma of the night forest. But the relief was ephemeral. The limousine was in ruins. The roof was torn, the sides dented, the interior a tangle of twisted metal and ripped upholstery. She was completely exposed, at the mercy of the elements and any other creature that might be lurking in the panther's hunting ground. The tiger, she could feel, was still on the roof, its presence a constant weight, a promise of protection, but also of danger. She thought of her son, the heir, the cold cruelty of his decision, the indifference with which he had abandoned her. He wanted her dead, but he didn't want to get his hands dirty. And now she was here between life and death, protected by one predator and hunted by others. A bitter irony, a destiny she could never have imagined. Suddenly, a new sound. It was not the growl of the dogs, nor the roar of the tiger. It was a more subtle sound, a rustle in the distant foliage, a slow, heavy movement that belonged to none of the attacking dogs. It was a sound that seemed to come from deeper in the jungle, a sound that carried with it a promise of even greater power, of a quieter, more lethal predator. The tiger on the roof, she felt, tensed. Its breathing, which had previously been a calm, powerful sound, now became slower, more concentrated. The weight on its paws shifted, and the elderly woman had the sensation that it was observing something in the darkness, something the dogs, in their blind fury, had not perceived. The air grew colder, denser. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves intensified, but now there was another scent, a wild, musky aroma, different from anything she had smelled before. It was the scent she had associated in her nightmares with the very essence of the hunting ground, the smell of a supreme predator, a silent and relentless hunter. The tiger, she realized, was not just scaring away the dogs. It was on high alert, its defensive posture transforming into readiness for battle. The beast that prowled the tires, the true threat the premise had mentioned, was perhaps finally revealing its presence. Hell, she knew, had more than one layer, and the next, it seemed, would be even deeper and more terrifying. The end, which seemed to have retreated, now advanced again with heavier steps and a darker promise. The rustling in the foliage became more distinct, a sound that was not the hurried step of dogs, but a calculated glide, almost a whisper in the darkness. The elderly woman felt the air grow even colder, a chill that did not come from the wind, but from a presence, a shadow creeping through the jungle. The musky, wild scent intensified, heavy and dense, enveloping her like a shroud. It was not the stench of dogs, nor the earthy aroma of the tiger. It was something more primal, purer in its ferocity. It was the smell of stalking, of silent hunting. The tiger on the roof, she could feel, was motionless, a statue of taut muscles. Its breathing, once a constant, powerful rhythm, was now almost imperceptible, a silence that spoke of absolute concentration. The weight on its paws distributed differently, as if every fiber of its being was ready to explode into action. It was not just observing, it was assessing, measuring the threat, one predator recognizing another. Then, the sound. Not a growl, but a soft dragging of claws on the damp earth, coming from below, near the limousine's rear tires. A sound that seemed to tear the veil of night, revealing the creature that produced it. The elderly woman felt a shiver run down her spine, an icy terror that surpassed the fear of the dogs. That was the beast of the hunting ground, the panther her son had invoked with his cruelty. A black shape, deeper than darkness itself, emerged from the shadows, circling the car's twisted carcass. Its movements were fluid, a silent dance of muscles beneath fur that absorbed the scant moonlight. The elderly woman could not see it, but she could feel it. She felt the weight of its invisible gaze, the intensity of its presence. The panther, a spectre of death, began to circle the limousine, its steps so light they barely disturbed the fallen leaves. She could hear the soft rustle, the occasional scrape of a claw on the metal, a sound that seemed to test the resilience of what remained of the vehicle. The creature moved to the rear, where the smell of blood from the elderly woman and the wounded dog was strongest. It paused, and the elderly woman felt the car's vibration, a subtle tremor coming from below, as if the panther was sniffing, absorbing every nuance of the trail. A low growl, almost a guttural purr, escaped the panther's throat, a sound that promised a swift and efficient death. It was not the dog's fury, but the cold efficiency of a born killer. The tiger on the roof, in turn, reacted, not with a roar, not with an attack. It rose, slowly, deliberately. It stretched its massive body, rising over the limousine's roof. The elderly woman felt the car sway under the weight, the metal groaning in protest. The tiger was using its height, its imposing presence. It became a gigantic silhouette against the night sky, a mountain of muscle and claws. The panther, which had been prowling the rear tires, sniffing the blood trail, stopped. The elderly woman felt the change in the air, the interruption of that fluid movement. The panther had perceived the tiger's elevation, the display of power. A tense silence hung over the clearing, broken only by the elderly woman's labored breathing and the frantic pounding of her heart. Then the tiger let out a roar, not a roar of fury, but a deep, cavernous sound that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. It was a warning roar, a sound that said, "This territory is mine, this prey is mine." The sound reverberated through the trees, a thunderclap in the night, and the elderly woman felt every cell of her body vibrate with the power of that sound. The panther for an instant remained motionless. The elderly woman could feel the hesitation, the internal battle between predatory instinct and the recognition of a superior force. The musky scent, which had been so strong, seemed to recede slightly, mingling with the tiger's more dominant odor. With a swift and almost imperceptible movement, the panther turned. There was no attack, no direct confrontation, only a recognition of hierarchy. The elderly woman heard the soft rustle of foliage moving away, the sound diminishing, growing more distant, until it disappeared completely into the depths of the jungle. The beast that prowled the tires had been scared away. The silence that followed was almost as oppressive as the battle's noise, a silence that was not of peace, but of a precarious truce. The elderly woman was exhausted. Her body ached in every fiber, her arm throbbed with a constant pain. She was alive, yes, but at what cost? The limousine was a skeleton, a tomb of twisted metal. She was completely exposed, at the mercy of the elements and any other creature that might venture there. The tiger, she could feel, was still on the roof. Its presence was a constant weight, a promise of protection, but also of imminent danger. It had not attacked her, had not devoured her. But why? What held it back? And for how long would it continue to protect her from other predators? The cold night air penetrated her torn clothes, and the elderly woman felt a chill that came not just from the cold, but from loneliness and despair. Her son had abandoned her to die, and now her life was in the paws of a predator, a cruel irony, a destiny she could never have conceived. The end, she knew, had not yet arrived. The night was long, and the panther's hunting ground held many secrets, many threats. With each passing moment, with each breath, the elderly woman felt she was merely postponing the inevitable. And the tiger, on the roof, was both her guardian and her potential executioner. The next layer of hell, she sensed, was just waiting for dawn. The silence that followed the panther's retreat was not a relief, but a new form of torment. It was a heavy silence, pregnant with unspoken threats, a vacuum where before there had been roars and growls. The elderly woman, tied to the disfigured hood of the limousine, felt her entire body tremble, not just from cold, but from an exhaustion that seemed to have corroded her bones. Every muscle ached, every nerve throbbed. Her wounded arm pulsed with a dull, constant pain, a cruel reminder of the night's brutality. She could feel the icy pre-dawn air penetrating her torn clothes, biting her exposed skin. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves now mingled with the strong, wild aroma of the tiger, a constant and oppressive presence on the car's roof. It was still there, she knew. She could feel the weight of its massive body, the subtle vibration of the metal beneath its paws, the slow, powerful breathing that, though not a growl, carried the promise of an untamed force. Why did it protect her? This question hammered in her mind, a dissonant melody amidst the chaos. It was a predator, a born killer, and yet it had scared away the pack of dogs and the panther. It was an unlikely guardian, an angel of death with fiery stripes, Or perhaps, she thought with a shiver, it was merely guarding her for itself, like a treasure to be claimed at the right moment. The idea was as terrifying as the prospect of being torn apart by others. Time dragged on, measured only by the frantic pounding of her heart and the intensifying cold. She tried to move her toes, feeling them numb, almost lifeless. The forced immobility was a torture, every fiber of her body crying out for movement, for warmth, for escape. But there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, a sacrifice on an altar of twisted metal under the watchful eye of a savage god, her son. His image, cold and calculating, surfaced in her mind, the cruelty of his decision, the indifference with which he had abandoned her. He wanted her dead, but without getting his hands dirty. And now she was here, between life and death, protected by one predator and hunted by others. A bitter irony, a destiny she could never have imagined. How could he have become so inhuman? She had loved him, raised him, given him everything, and in return he had thrown her to the wolves, or in this case, to the dogs, panthers, and tigers. The tiger on the roof, she could feel, shifted slightly. The metal groaned under its weight, and the elderly woman held her breath, awaiting the attack, the end that always seemed imminent. But it merely settled, its presence a constant weight, an ambiguous promise. She could hear the soft sound of its fur brushing against the metal, the rhythm of its breathing, a constant reminder of its proximity. The night was a tapestry of sounds and smells, the distant rustle of leaves, the nocturnal chirping of insects, the damp smell of earth, and the penetrating aroma of dried blood. Her blindness sharpened her other senses, transforming the world around her into a symphony of sensations. Every sound was amplified, every scent more intense. She felt the dampness of the pre-dawn dew accumulating on her face, the cold that seemed to seep into her bones. She thought of the life she had led, of the mistakes and successes, the joys and sorrows. Everything seemed so distant now, so irrelevant in the face of that moment's rawness. The only thing that mattered was the next breath, the next heartbeat, the incessant struggle for survival. She did not want to die like this, abandoned, forgotten, devoured. There was dignity in death, but not in this. The tiger, she felt, was on alert. Though motionless, its presence radiated a contained tension. There were no more dog growls, nor the silent creep of the panther, but the jungle was never truly silent. There was always a movement, a subtle sound, an invisible presence. She imagined the tiger's eyes, yellow and piercing, sweeping the darkness, guarding her from dangers she could not see but could feel. The cold became unbearable. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry. The pain in her arm throbbed with renewed intensity, and she feared the wound might be infecting, but there was nothing she could do. Only wait, endure. Hope was a luxury she could not afford. Then a new sound. It was not a growl nor a rustle. It was a more distant sound, but unmistakable. The song of a bird. Not a nocturnal bird, but one that announced the arrival of day. A thread of light, faint and almost imperceptible, began to filter through the dense foliage. The air, though still cold, seemed to carry a promise of warmth. The elderly woman felt a pang of something akin to hope, but it was quickly suffocated by terror, dawn, the next layer of hell, as she had predicted. What would the day bring? Would it be the end of her ordeal, or the beginning of a new and more terrible battle? The tiger on the roof, she felt, remained motionless, an imposing silhouette against the brightening sky. Its eyes, she imagined, were fixed on the horizon, awaiting what the new day would reveal. The panther's hunting ground was about to awaken, and with it, perhaps, new threats. The old woman was alive, but dawn, she knew, did not mean salvation. It only meant that the darkness of night had given way to the visible cruelty of day. The faint light filtering through the dense leaves brought no solace, but a new layer of terror. The elderly woman, Her blind eyes, fixed on an invisible point, felt the change in the air. The cutting, damp cold of pre-dawn was beginning to give way to a drier breeze, foreshadowing the suffocating heat the sun would bring. Every fiber of her body cried out for relief, for an end to that torture. But dawn, she knew, was not the end of the ordeal, but rather the revelation of its harshness. The birdsong, once a distant thread of hope, now intensified, forming a vibrant chorus that celebrated life, a life from which she was brutally excluded. She could hear the clearer rustle of leaves, the buzzing of awakening insects, and the smell of damp earth mingled with the more pungent aroma of vigorous vegetation. But the tiger's scent, strong and musky, still dominated, a constant and oppressive presence. It was there. She could feel the weight of its body on the limousine's roof, the subtle vibration of the metal beneath its paws, the guardian and the potential executioner. Throughout the night, its presence had been a shield against the unseen. Now, under the intensifying light, it would become visible, and with visibility, the certainty of her fate. What would it do when the sun was high? Protect her from other predators, only to devour her itself? The irony was too cruel to bear. The pain in her wounded arm pulsed with renewed intensity, a constant reminder of the night's violence. Her lips were cracked, her throat dry, and thirst was a silent agony. She tried to move her toes, feeling them numb, almost lifeless. The forced immobility was a torture, every muscle of her body crying out for movement, for warmth, for escape. But there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, a sacrifice on an altar of twisted metal under the watchful eye of a savage god. Sunlight began to pierce the treetops, hitting her face. It was not a comforting warmth, but a burning heat, revealing the dirt and dried blood on her skin. She felt the heat intensify, sweat beginning to trickle, mingling with dried tears. Blindness, which had once protected her from the sight of horror, now left her at the mercy of her other senses, amplified, torturous. The tiger, she felt, moved. Not a sudden movement, but a slow, deliberate stretch. The metal groaned under its weight, and the elderly woman held her breath, waiting. What would come now? The final attack? Or would it simply abandon her, leaving her to wither under the sun, a slow and agonizing death? The second option seemed even crueler, an inhuman prolongation of her suffering. She imagined the tiger, now fully visible, its orange and black fur gleaming under the sun, its yellow, piercing eyes sweeping the clearing, a perfect predator, a killing machine, and yet it had scared away the dogs and the panther. Why? There was no logic, only the capricious brutality of nature. How could he have become so inhuman? She had loved him, raised him, given him everything, and in return he had thrown her to the wolves, or in this case to the dogs, panthers and tigers. The pain of betrayal was almost as intense as the physical pain. The tiger on the roof, she felt, made a sound, not a roar, not a growl, but a kind of low grunt, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of its chest. And then a movement. The weight on the limousine's roof lessened. The metal groaned one last time, and the car swayed slightly. The elderly woman felt the air change. The tiger's strong, musky scent, which had been a constant and oppressive presence throughout the night, began to diminish. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a receding tide. She heard the soft rustle of foliage, the sound of heavy paws moving away, growing more distant, until it disappeared completely into the depths of the jungle. It had left her. The silence that followed was the most oppressive of all. There were no more dog growls, nor the silent creep of the panther, nor the ambiguous weight of the tiger. Only the incessant birdsong, the buzzing of insects, and the sound of her own labored breathing. She was completely alone. The sun now beat directly on her face, burning her skin, revealing the extent of her vulnerability. The limousine, a twisted skeleton of metal, was now her sunlit tomb. There was no longer the protection of darkness, nor the ambiguous presence of the predator. The panther's hunting ground now was just the hunting ground. The elderly woman was alive, yes, but at what cost? The life she had fought to maintain throughout the night now seemed an unbearable burden. Hope, a luxury she could not afford, had vanished with the tiger's departure. She was at the mercy of the elements, of thirst, of hunger, of her wounds, and of any creature the sun might bring. The end, she knew, had not arrived with the night nor with dawn. The end was a process, a slow and agonizing dissolution. She was abandoned, forgotten, a sacrifice on an altar of twisted metal, beneath the indifferent gaze of the blue sky. The heir had gotten what he wanted, his hands were clean, and the blind mother, tied to the limousine's hood, awaited the inevitable under the merciless sun that revealed all the cruelty of the world.